Right in the middle of the Hebrew Bible sits the Song of Songs. It is a collection of passionate, physically intimate love poetry. If you read the text directly, you will notice a few glaring omissions. There are no mentions of God. There are no specific religious themes. There isn't even a clear moral plot. This created an intense historical paradox. The scholars who canonized these texts lived in strict religious societies. As Old Testament scholar Franz Delitzsch points out, interpreting a book like this forces the reader to decide on the meaning of the whole before they even begin. To understand how they handled it, you have to look at the cultural mindset of antiquity. At the time, philosophical movements like Gnosticism and asceticism were gaining traction. These movements taught that the material world, and human sexuality in particular, was base, carnal, and evil. Because of this worldview, heavyweights of early theology like Augustine and Jerome could not accept a surface-level reading of the text. The idea that a holy book contained secular, erotic poetry was incompatible with their view of the divine. To keep the book in the canon, readers reclassified the entire work. They turned to allegory, layering a transcendent spiritual meaning over a poem that is, in its plain text, about human sexuality. This introduces a concept called eisegesis. Instead of drawing meaning out of a text, eisegesis is the act of a reader projecting their own ideas into a text, especially one that feels vague. In the primary Jewish allegorical tradition, scholars looked at the lovers and reimagined them entirely. The bridegroom became God, and the bride became the nation of Israel. Early interpreters used texts like the Targum to map the poem onto their own defining history. They decided the poetry represented the journey of the Hebrew nation, starting specifically with the Exodus. This mapping dictated the poem's role in the liturgy. By linking the text to the story of national liberation, it found a specific place in the calendar of rituals. That historical projection is why today, this collection of non-religious love poetry is officially read during Passover, the first Jewish festival of the year. When Christian commentators approached the same text, they held up a different mirror. In their reading, the bridegroom became Jesus Christ, and the bride became his church. The 3rd century scholar Origen championed this view, instructing readers to mortify the flesh and apply the words to the inner spirit. To maintain this, metaphors required maneuvering. The physical king's chambers, Origen argued, actually meant Christ bringing believers into his church. The abstraction of the female body went even further. In chapter 4, the text praises the bride's 2 breasts. Allegoricists decided this was a reference to the Old and New Testaments. Over the centuries, this mirror kept morphing into fringe variations. Depending on who was reading it, the bride meant the Virgin Mary, the peaceful state under Solomon's rule, or the soul's union with God. The Christian allegorical method proved flexible. It allowed various theological factions to extract whatever specific doctrine they needed from a piece of ancient poetry. There is a major flaw in this entire system. If you read the actual text of the Song of Songs, it never once indicates that it is an allegory. Without objective textual boundaries, symbols lack validation. If the text doesn't define the metaphor, the imagery can be twisted to fit any interpretation. The results often peaked in absurdity. In chapter 6, the text mentions 80 concubines, which some scholars interpreted as 80 heresies destined to plague the church. There is zero validation for that conclusion anywhere in the book. Because it relies on speculation rather than objective evidence, the allegorical method has largely lost favor among modern biblical scholars. But the history of this book provides a fascinating psychological case study. It shows us how humans consume complex, vague, or challenging pieces of art. When we encounter something we do not understand, or something that makes us uncomfortable, we project our own cultural anxieties and immediate needs onto the blank spaces. 2 millennia of allegorical interpretation failed to tell us what the ancient author intended, but it succeeded in giving us a crystal-clear reflection of the people reading it.